brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Trumpet's Call. I'm Maria. I pray that you're blessed today. It's so great that you've decided to come once again and join me as we continue our series in Revelation chapter 17. We have certainly been uncovering some truths, and there's more to be uncovered. So thank you for once again coming and joining me. And I pray that you're blessed today. I pray that you're holding on to faith and you've got your eyes on the prize, which is the kingdom that's coming after all of the craziness ends. But in the meantime, we continue to study Yahuwah's word and hope that as we uncover these truths, it can help us to be better worshipers of the Father. So last time in our session, we talked about the history of the Roman Empire, and we talked about many of the emperors and the leaders. We talked about the 10 kingdoms that was a part of the Western Empire, the 10 toes of the Roman Empire, who had not received power as of yet under the beast system. They didn't receive any power until after the Roman Empire had been dissolved. And so we're going to get into that a little bit more today. But we also talked about Constantine. He was one of the key pivotal characters. In our last session, we talked about how Constantine called for the Council of Nicaea and essentially created a religion and created a god for the Roman Empire in an attempt to try to unite the different factions and the different groups of his people. Now, when you think about this, I don't think Constantine, as a human being, thought that he was creating a religion for the whole world. He was creating a religion and a new god for his empire. Okay? And so somehow this ended up being the world religion, this religion of Christianity that was based on a false Messiah. So we discussed that last time, and there's more to that we're going to get into prayerfully today. If not today, then in our next session after this one. There's just so much to uncover, so let's get into it. Today, we're going to be just wrapping up our discussion of Constantine, and then we're going to be discussing a few more emperors, just to kind of continue on in the vein of a historical look at Rome and the Roman Empire and how things have transpired to bring us to the point where we are today. So Constantine created a religion for his empire. He created a god for his empire. He got together with many of his top officials and came up with names and gods that the people in his empire worshipped, narrowed it down to 5, and then he combined them to make Jesus, Horus, Krishna, or Christ. And so the very name of Jesus Christ is something that was taken and derived from pagan deities. So it's to be noted that the term Christianity or Christians was not used. It was not what the believers called themselves in the first century. They did not call themselves Christians. The heathens began to call them Christians at Antioch, and it was a mocking. It was an insult. It was a mocking thing that they would call the new believers. But that didn't happen until after the Council of Nicaea, when this term Christian came out of that meeting. So at that point, the early believers called themselves followers of the way, and we have several scriptures that demonstrate this truth to us. So we're going to look at a few of them right now. So in Acts chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, we read, "Now Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of Yahusha, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem." So we see here that they're called followers of the way, or just belonging to the way, because Messiah is the way. In Acts chapter 19, verse 9, we read, "But when some were becoming hardened and disobedient, speaking evil of the way before the people, he withdrew from them and took away the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. Acts chapter 19, verse 23. About that time there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way. Acts chapter 22, verse 4. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prisons. This is Paul talking here. And then we'll just read one more. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I do serve Yahuwah of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the Torah and that is written in the prophets. So they were called followers of the way, or just the way. They were not called Christians. They were called Christians by the heathens after that term began to become popular in the Roman Empire after the Council of Nicaea. So, in all honesty, with all integrity, we should not be calling ourselves Christians, because our Messiah's name is not Christ. The anointed one is not the word Christ. It's Mashiach, or Messiah, anointed one, Mashiach. Now, his name is Yahusha HaMashiach. So if we want to call ourselves something that's similar to Christ, or Christian, it'd be Mashiachans or something of that nature, or something like that. But we call ourselves Hebrews and believers. We call ourselves followers of the way. We don't want to label ourselves with names that the pagans originated or came up with. So I'm going to read here a little bit of this article from Wikipedia. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was the loss of central political control in the Western Roman Empire, a process in which the empire failed to enforce its rule and its vast territory was divided into several successor polities. The Roman Empire lost the strengths it had allowed to exercise effective control over its western provinces. Modern historians posit factors including the effectiveness and numbers of the army, the health and numbers of the Roman population, the strength of the economy, the competence of the emperors, the internal struggles for power, the religious changes of the period, and the efficiency of the civil administration. Increasing pressure from invading barbarians outside Roman culture also contributed greatly to the collapse. Climatic changes and both endemic and epidemic disease drove many of these immediate factors. The reason for the collapse are major subjects of the historiography of the ancient world, and they inform much modern discourse on state failure. So this article is seeking thus far to explain to us what things led to the fall of the Roman Empire, what qualities, what circumstances happening within the empire that led to its fall. And so it points to things like invasion of the Huns and the inability of the Roman government to put down those skirmishes between the invading Huns invading the Goths in the territory, or just the dissatisfaction with the people in the territory, diseases, climatic changes, things happening within the empire that was just beyond their control and beyond their ability to manage. It sounds a lot to me like the Roman Empire at this time had become the beast that it is, the beast that it was, and that it was unwieldy and uncontrollable. And the judgment of the Most High was on it. It was not meant to last in that present form forever. It was supposed to fall. It was supposed to fail, and the 10 toes were supposed to assume power. The little horn was supposed to assume power. So in this article, as they attempt to explain the things that led to the fall of the Roman Empire, I think it's very interesting that I see the hand of the Most High here. I see the hand of the Most High allowing the Huns to come in. I see the hand of the Most High causing dissatisfaction among the 10 toes, the 10 kingdoms. I see the Most High causing things to go exactly in accordance with His will. And that gives me hope for the future. That gives me hope for the time that we're in right now. Continuing. In 376, unmanageable numbers of Goths and other non-Roman people fleeing from the Huns entered the empire. In 395, after winning 2 destructive civil wars, Theodosius I died. leaving a collapsing field army and the empire still plagued by Goths, divided between the warring ministers of his two incapable sons. Further barbarian groups crossed the Rhine and other frontiers, and like the Goths, were not exterminated, expelled, or subjugated. The armed forces of the Western Empire became few and ineffective, and despite brief recoveries under able leaders, central rule was never effectively consolidated. By 476, the position of the Western Roman Emperor wielded negligible military, political, or financial power, and had no effective control over the scattered Western domains that could still be described as Roman. Barbarian kings had established their own power in much of the area of the Western Empire. In 476, the Germanic barbarian king Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire in Italy, Romulus Augustulus, and the Senate sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Roman Emperor Flavius Zeno. Okay, that's to be noted. That's something of note there. When the Western Roman Empire fell, they sent the imperial insignia of the Western Roman Empire, because remember, of the two legs that represented the Western and the Eastern Roman Empire, the Western Empire was stronger than the Eastern Empire. And so it bore the official insignia of what would be determined the Roman Empire. And when it fell, it sent the official insignia to the east, to the eastern half of the empire, so that the empire, such as it was, continued to exist under the eastern leg. Though the western leg was cut out, it continued to exist under the eastern leg. And you'll see that at some point in the future, that power will be transferred once again back to the western leg of the Roman Empire. The next ruler that I'd like to talk about is Charlemagne. And we'll see shortly how he plays a pivotal role in the revival of the Western Roman Empire. And we're going to be reading this article from the Trumpet.com. And it reads, Pax Romana came to an end when the Roman Empire crumbled during the 400s, 476 to be exact. Rome's rule disintegrated, its legions retreated, and the western leg of the empire fell to Germanic kings. However, Roman culture, tradition, language, and religion still survived in this area during the time known as the Dark Ages. Without a single political power in charge, Europe was overrun by warring powers. In the AD 500s and 600s, a Germanic tribe called the Franks moved into the territory now known as France and established an empire. The eastern leg of the Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire, headquartered at Constantinople. Beginning in the early 700s, Islam began making inroads into Europe, pushing first against the Byzantine Empire and then coming in through Spain. Muslims tried to invade France in the 730s, but they were blocked by Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer, the leader of the Franks at the time. Charles Martel's grandson was Charlemagne. Frank sounds a lot like France, but this tribe was Germanic. This is why both France and Germany claim Charlemagne. We read, in 799, Pope Leo III had been assaulted by some of the Romans who tried to put out his eyes and tear out his tongue. Leo escaped and fled to Charlemagne at Paderborn. Charlemagne, advised by scholar Alcuin, traveled to Rome in November 800 and held a synod. On December 23rd, Leo swore an oath of innocence to Charlemagne. His position having thereby been weakened, the Pope sought to restore his status. 2 days later at Mass, on Christmas Day, when Charlemagne knelt at the altar to pray, the Pope crowned him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans, in St. Peter's Basilica. In doing so, the Pope rejected the legitimacy of the Empress Irene of Constantinople. So by doing this, the Pope is essentially, first of all, indicating that as the Pope, he has the authority to determine who should be the leader of the empire, of the Western and the Eastern empires. And secondly, he essentially dismissed the current leader at Constantinople, the Empress Irene. He said, we're going to dismiss the fact that you're in charge right now, the fact that you're the Empress, and we're going to reinstate the Western leg of the Roman Empire, and we're putting Charlemagne at the head. So this right here marks the revival of the Roman Empire, but also the initiation of the Holy Roman Empire. We'll go on to read here. It says, by bestowing the imperial crown upon Charlemagne, the Pope arrogated to himself the right to appoint the Emperor of the Romans, establishing the imperial crown as his own personal gift, but simultaneously granting himself implicit superiority over the emperor whom he had created. And because the Byzantines had proved so unsatisfactory from every point of view, political, military, and doctrinal, he would select a Westerner, the one man who by his wisdom and statesmanship and the vastness of his dominion stood out head and shoulders above his contemporaries. With Charlemagne's coronation, therefore, the Roman Empire remained, so far as either of them, Charlemagne and Leo, were concerned, one and indivisible. With Charles as its emperor, though there can have been little doubt that the coronation, with all that it implied, would be furiously contested in Constantinople. So what we're seeing here is an official marriage of church and state. You have Charlemagne, who is the leader, the sovereign of the empire, and we have Pope Leo, who has assigned him to this position and is expecting to have influence over him. What's happening here is that the church at Rome has hired itself one major bodyguard in the person of Charlemagne. And no longer at this point will they have to worry about being attacked, because they now have the military arm of their two-headed eagle, one head representing the ecclesiastical or the church aspect of Roman leadership of the Roman Empire, and the other representing governmental, the perfect marriage of church and state. We further read in the Trumpet.com, Charlemagne forcibly converted tens of thousands of his own Frankish people to Catholicism. There were strict laws throughout his domain enforcing Catholic worship. The penalty for worshiping any other way was death. For comparison, the penalty for murder in Charlemagne's kingdom was to pay compensation to the victim's family unless you killed a priest, a crime that received the death penalty. All children had to be baptized before they were a year old. Unauthorized public meetings were outlawed. The only legal assemblies were government-sanctioned functions and church services. Charlemagne also helped unify the Catholic Church itself. The Holy Roman Empire and Prophecy states, prior to Charlemagne, in each of the various regions of Europe, the local Catholic Church celebrated Sunday services with its own local customs. When Charlemagne arrived, he made it policy to use the liturgy from Rome. Throughout his empire, the Sunday service was observed in the same way it was at Rome. Now that Western Europe was united under one empire, the emperor could ensure that Christianity was practiced uniformly. Under the Pope's direction, Charlemagne streamlined the observance of Catholicism throughout Europe, ensuring that it was looking to Rome. He also relied on the church to regulate the lives of his subjects. Bishops, abbots, priests, and monks were the king's chief agents, writes Johnson. Royal officials were selected from among the higher clergy, and Charlemagne and his successors expanded and developed the use of church councils as legislative and executive organs. Through the church, the Carolingian age legislated in enormous detail, on every aspect of conduct, especially on economic, family, and sexual relationships. And this is from A History of Christianity. Charlemagne used church officials in his government administration. Appointing priests to positions of power instead of noblemen prevented the possibility of noblemen passing their power on to their children and creating a dynasty that could overthrow him. Priests were not yet required to be celibate, but it was much harder to pass a religious title onto your children than a secular one. Charlemagne would have been very aware of this risk, since that was exactly how his father had become king. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church benefited from having positions of power throughout the empire. So it's clear here that Charlemagne used the power that he was given as Holy Roman Emperor to further Christianity, to further Catholic Christianity throughout all of Europe and on into other regions beyond Europe. What he did in many cases was he would move into an area and then demand that the people convert to Christianity. And if they didn't, they were murdered. They were killed right on the spot. So you can see how this Charlemagne, this emperor of the newly revived Western Roman Empire, acts like the beast. The scriptures describes the beast as one that tramples under its claws and devours with its teeth. And Charlemagne, as the leader of the newly revived Roman Empire, Western branch of the Roman Empire, is like that beast that devours his enemies. So where we are right now in the history of the Roman Empire is perfectly aligned with our next verse of scripture in Revelation chapter 17, verse 8 and 9. So I will read them and then we will try to tie up some loose ends here. It reads, "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth." So, verse 8, "The beast which thou sawest." Now remember, the Apostle John is being shown certain things in certain sequential order of the beast system. And so the beast the Apostle John was shown was Rome. We've already established that in previous lessons. He was being shown the beast that was Rome. Rome was but one part, one beast within multiple beast systems that existed throughout time in different forms, which I've already stated began with ancient Egypt, and then Assyria, Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and at this time, the Romans. These all make up the totality of the beast system. But each individual empire is a beast in and of itself. So there are beasts within beast. The overall beast system that exists to worship the dragon. This is how the dragon derives his worship, through this beast system. Just as the Most High is worshipped through his saints and his followers, those who keep his commandments, the dragon is worshipped by those who further his agenda, who do the things that he would have them to do. And there are 7 iterations of this beast kingdom. We are in the 6th at the writing of this book. As John is being shown this, they are in the 6th beast, which is Rome, pagan Rome. Okay, I'll call it pagan Rome so that we can differentiate between it and the further Roman empires. Pagan Rome. So John is in the time of pagan Rome. Pagan Rome is ruling. Okay, the beast that John is seeing is the beast that was, but it was currently ruling. Why is it being referred to in the past tense? The 6th beast, pagan Rome, was currently ruling, but here in the scripture it's being referred to as the beast that was. because at the time that John is seeing it, it no longer exists. He's being shown a picture in the future at a time where this sixth beast no longer is ruling. The Western Roman Empire, deposed and essentially dead, having suffered a deadly head wound from the King of Germany, Odoacer. Okay? So it was not at this time. But it says, but it shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. So there's a time coming, he's saying, that this kingdom, which wasn't, it will be again. And let's continue on, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. And he says, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation, when they behold the beast that was, is not, and yet is. It's a mystery. The Western Roman Empire, it was, and then it was not, and then it will be again. That's what he's saying. He's talking about the revival of the Western Roman Empire under the guise and under the power of the Roman Universal Church. Hear what I'm saying? He's talking about the revival of the Roman Empire under the power of the Roman Universal Church. Okay? And it doesn't appear that this Western Empire has been revived because everything has been kept underground. Everything has been kept under wraps. The Roman Empire has been ruling from the Vatican all of this time. But it's been secret, and it's been going around to the different nations and by hook or crook bringing them into the beast system. And the nations, one by one, have been giving their power over to the beast. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but every time there's a new president or a new leader, who does the president have to go report themselves to? Have you ever noticed that this certain person receives every dignitary who comes and essentially bows at his feet? Because they're ruling, they are the iteration of Rome that's ruling, but they're ruling through the 10 kingdoms, which is represented now by the United Nation, being split up into 10 regions. And so their reach is now worldwide. And now we're beginning to see it. It was happening all along, but we couldn't see it. But now that the time of the end is nearing, they're bringing it all out in the open so that now they can take their beast statue and put it out in front of the UN building in New York City. They're now out in the open about the fact that the 8th iteration of the beast system is now here. Let me go on further so I can explain. Verse 9 says, and here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. We know where the 7 mountains are. They're in Rome. This beast system that John is being shown sits on 7 mountains in Rome. It is the Vatican that has been ruling all of this time. It is the revival of the Western Roman Empire. And I will prove it to you as we continue on in this lesson. So let's go to Daniel, because Daniel chapter 7 wonderfully correlates with what we're seeing here in Revelation chapter 17, verses 8 and 9. So I'll begin at verse 7. It says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. Iron represents Rome. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. What made this beast different from all the others? First of all, it was the power that it possesses. It possessed the power of iron, and it was its longevity. The Roman Empire existed in one way, shape, or form so far for over 2,000 years. It has existed, but it's been hidden in a certain part of it where the people of the world didn't necessarily know that the Roman Empire was ruling. But it is. It has been, and it is. It's different from the other beasts in its reach, in its power, and in its strength. And it devours with its iron teeth. And then it breaks into pieces. So it devours and it breaks into pieces. And it stamped the residue with the feet of it. Now, take this picture into your mind. Imagine the Most High allowing Rome to come against his people in Jerusalem. Imagine the Most High allowing this beast to take the nation and to devour it, to chomp it in its jaws and its iron teeth. Okay? That's what they did to our people. And breaking it and devouring it, and broke us into pieces. And then, to further persecute the people, the 10 toes have been stamping us, persecuting us around the nations, around the world. This is the picture that we're seeing here. This beast, almost seemingly created for the purpose of world domination, the Most High allowing it to exist, to do his bidding, to bring the people of the Most High to their knees, to scatter and to shatter us so that we could turn from our wickedness and turn to the Most High to do his will and to do his bidding. We'll continue on here in verse 8. It says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Okay, this little horn. Who is this little horn? What is this little horn? Horn in the scriptures represents a power or a kingdom. And what Daniel is seeing here is a power or a kingdom that arose that is small in stature. Perhaps it's a powerful kingdom, but it occupies a small space like a city. And perhaps this horn has eyes like a man that speaks great things. And perhaps the eyes like a man is a man who says, I stand in the place of Mashiach. I am the vicar of Christ. Perhaps this man speaks great things and says that he is the Most High's representative on earth. This man speaking great things. And history shows us that under the power of the Roman Universal Church, 3 of the original 10 toes of the Roman Empire were plucked up by the roots. 3 of them. And I will show you that in just a minute. And so Daniel's little horn, the little horn that he said that he saw that was stout and that was fat, that was powerful, it's been ruling. I'm going to read this article here, and I will place the link to this down at the bottom of the page. It says, the little horn power. Daniel 7:8. I considered the 10 horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. Pope Pius IX gave this remarkable testimony. It is, therefore, by a particular decree of divine providence that, at the fall of the Roman Empire and its partition into separate kingdoms, the Roman pontiff, whom Christ made the head and center of his entire church, acquired civil power. And this is Pius IX, the Apostolic Letter in the Cum Catholica Ecclesia, March 26, 1860. Okay, and it goes on to say, divine providence, indeed, Daniel had prophesied it. The phrase little horn indicates a little kingdom. This is one of the distinguishing characteristics of this entity, its small size geographically. The Vatican, the headquarters of the Universal Church, located in Rome, is today the smallest independent country in the world, covering only about 108 acres in size. The papal monarchy came up among the divided kingdoms, the 10 horns, after the fall of the Roman Empire, and has had influence greatly disproportionate to its geographical size. Daniel 7:8, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. Who are these 3 kingdoms that were uprooted? The Heruli, some prefer to call them the Visigoths, the Vandals, and finally the Ostrogoths. Each of these were Aryan, who denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. They were considered heretics by the church. Okay, I have to explain what's happening here. There was something called the Aryan Heresy. There was this priest, his name was Arius, and he posited that Messiah was a messenger of the Most High. He was the Son of the Most High. He was divine, but he wasn't the Father in the flesh. He wasn't the Father. He wasn't God the Father and God the Holy Spirit and God the Son. He was saying that the Trinity doctrine was paganism and that it had no place in the church of the real Messiah. So he posited this, and so he was persecuted for saying this. In all of the kingdoms, there were 3 kingdoms within the 10 who held to this doctrine that Messiah was a messenger of the Most High, the Son of the Most High, but separate from the Most High, in that Yahuwah is one. Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah our Elohim, Yahuwah is one. Okay, so all who held to that doctrine that the Father is one, and that Yahusha was his representative on the earth at that time to do his will and to do his bidding, and that when Messiah said the Father is greater than I, he meant that. All who held to that position, they were destroyed by the military arm of the universal church. They were plucked up by the root. They were utterly destroyed. This is the power of the little horn that has been ruling, that has been spreading false doctrine, on which the woman sits, false religion, on which the woman sits on these 7 hills, and it's been in power for a long time. This Roman Empire continues. Pagan Rome was, it was not, and then it was. And the ruling power arose from the bottomless pit, and it's been ruling. And so over the generations, it has been going into territories and deposing all those who hold to the true doctrine of our Messiah. Okay? And where did it get its authority? We will talk about that next time. So, thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining me for another session of our Revelation chapter 17 series. The Most High is certainly speaking to his people in these last times and revealing truth to us, and we are so grateful. I learned a new verse of scripture this past week, and I wanted to share it with you. It's Proverbs 23:23, and it reads, "Buy the truth and sell it not, also wisdom and instruction and understanding." So how do we buy the truth? We buy it with our time. We buy it with our effort. We buy it with our study. We buy it with our faith. We buy it by attending to the Most High and to his will and to his wishes and his wants, being those who sit at the feet of the King in his courts, inquiring in his temple. May the Most High bless and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and grant you peace. May we all find ourselves inquiring in his temple and learning so that he can teach us his ways, so that we can be transformed into the image of his Son. Thank you for joining me today, brothers and sisters. Shalom.